Please welcome him as our last speaker of the day.
It's the first time in my life I've ever been introduced through the answer of a question. That's pretty amazing. Can I have the slides? I just want to show you 3.5 minutes to give you context of the work I'm going to show.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. نام است مرزا. دیگه 17 ساله هستم. در کابل خیرخانه زندگی میکنیم. سری خوشبخارا. نمی چهارکار اومدیم. در مهجه که بودیم 24 ساعت جنگ بود. حالا ما بیخی عادی شده ما دیگه. که این مثالش میام فشار میشه ما خود جای گرفتن نمیتونیم مثالش عجیب بگیریم. اینو می روز از دیگه متعاملا میرم من حال بیخی عادی شدم من. موترشوی میگد من خودم در زمستان میسار صعب بود. وقتی که خود موتر میشتم یخ میگرفتش. یکی بار که بود دستای موقعیت پوستک میدم. بسیار دیگه زندگی بسیار بود تو وقت. حالا دیگه خودم اسکیت میزنم دیگه کار میکنیم در خود اسکیت پارک پاک میکنیم دیگه سازی هم میکنیم. نه بیخی دیگه عادت کردم اسکیت نزنم حتی این مریض بود. حالا در مجموع دیگه زندگی کردن در کابل بسیار مشکل است. دیگه بسیار خوش هستیم که این شما بوده که ما را در این قرار راهنمایی کردی که ما تا چی رسیدیم.
My name is Shana Nolan and I'm here managing Kabul's first skate park and the Skaterstan program. Skateboarding's a fantastic way to get kids to communicate with each other and build relationships with each other. The main focus of Skaterstan is to build kids' confidence and give them a voice. Skaterstan's becoming a bit of a hub of female sporting activity, which is very exciting. There's nothing like watching an Afghan woman roll down a ramp for the first time and she's achieved something that she never thought she would.
So I'm going to talk about architecture for the 99%. My organization I co-founded in 1999 as a way to get architects, designers, planners involved in humanitarian issues. Our work is quite different from your typical architecture firm. Our budgets are really tight. Our time constraints are pretty tight. And I'm going to repeat this probably a couple of times. We end up working in situations that have been neglected or forgotten. This is a project we did in Peru. The problem that happens in a post-disaster or a post-conflict situation is if CNN, Fox, or the BBC doesn't show up, you're not getting helped. There's a massive disparity in the response to issues based on whether you get international or national coverage or not. So in an earthquake that devastated over 50% of the schools in this area of Peru, there is very little kind of international response, and as a result, 3 years later, 50% of those schools still had yet to be touched. And so working with some individuals, our architects and teams had 6 months to take this school, make it seismically sound, and have it up and operational on a very tight budget. But what we found in doing our work is it's not about building a building. It's about how do you transform a community through creating jobs, social cohesion, a resilience within that community, dignity and hope. So I'm kind of going to go backwards. I've never done this presentation this way before, but I I want to kind of talk about the kind of business aspect of how does humanitarian and social impact design become a career? Because as this work is becoming popular and as it's getting a lot of attention, there tends to be this kind of, I call it kind of the happy puppy story, where you get 28 minutes of really depressing crap news, and then the last 2 minutes of the television, they put a nice, cute story about how some designer went somewhere and helped build something, and isn't it sweet? And so what happens is you end up being the happy puppy story, and no one takes you as critically as you should do. And what I want to kind of show is that architecture is split right now, and there's kind of, you think about it a little bit like the medical profession. You have academia, which is a lot like, say, a cancer research hospital. And you have your average architect, who's like your general practitioner, your family doctor. Then you have your star architects, which are your plastic surgeons. And we're in the emergency room. So I'm going to talk about how the work in the emergency room of architecture is becoming much more relevant than the plastic surgeons. We've been around 12 years. We've done over now 4,000 structures in 48 countries, and approximately 2 million people either live, learn, heal, or work in structures that my organization's built. We have 5 regional offices. We're based in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Cape Town, South Africa, San Francisco, which is where I live, Sendai, Japan, Bogota, Colombia, that just opened last month, and we're going to need some graphic designers. And we may be opening an office in Rome, but I may end up opening one in Budapest instead. And so we have a regionalized approach to running an office. And we also have independent chapters. What happened in the growth of the organization is the first 6 years, it was just myself and my laptop and my mobile phone. And because we had a really nice website, everyone thought we were this international NGO, and they didn't realize it was just me. So they would call up and they would say, "We'd like you to rebuild Detroit." And I was like, "You're kind of fucked, because it's just me, and if you think I'm going to do that, then you're kidding." But I realized that was not the response that you should give. And 2 things I noticed about architects and engineers is they had something in common. It's very rare for architects and engineers to have something in common. That is that they like to talk and they like to drink. So we started something called Drinking for Humanity, which is the first Tuesday of the month, you meet in a bar, and you put some money down, and you start discussing issues, you invite community groups in, and you start interacting with local issues. And as a result, hundreds and now thousands of architects meet every month and engage the community in projects. There is still quite a bit of drinking involved. These are independent of us. And I'm going to talk about, people won't show you how much money they make and things like that, but I think it doesn't make any sense if you don't expose the reality of how to run a business. So for the first 6 years, we really were a tiny organization trying to struggle. And then we realized something. I'm going to quote Gandhi quite a bit, but the first thing is everyone keeps coming to me who wants to do social impact design, and they say, "Be the change you want to see in the world," right? Be the change. Like, if I hear that phrase one more time, I'm going to get aggressive, which is probably not what Gandhi wanted. I think if Gandhi was around today, he wouldn't say, "Be the change you want to see in the world." He would say, "Be the bank." When you control the financing, you can actually change projects and make a huge difference. And so what's happened is we were originally kind of a design organization that was giving pro bono design services to communities. We suddenly realized in 2005, we actually had to manage the construction process and actually manage the design process to make sure and ensure that wasn't taken out. And as a result, we grew rapidly. We're now close to about a $10 million organization with 115 people on staff. I pay my architects as well, and I'll talk about that a little later. I'm going to talk about 12 ideals and 1 truth, and then I'm going to show 3 projects. There's a theme in showing 3 projects I've noticed in this conference. First, what we've learned is you have to build this dedicated team, almost like an army of interdisciplinary building professionals. Architects are just one element of it. You can have anthropologists, you can have landscape architects, you have community development officials, but working cohesively towards one goal. The other is to provide professional design services. And I mean this really specifically, professional. You spend 7 to 10 years of your life training to be a professional designer or architect, and then you go out into a community and you just do some, schematic designs. Communities don't want a schematic design. They want your professional expertise, and your role is not to do good, but actually to take your skill set and your own knowledge and implement it where it's needed. And the second part of that is the last thing a community wants is yet another group of people telling them what they should do. What a community wants is you to build. So when you make a commitment to a community, it's not about these are the services I'll provide. You make a commitment to implement that solution. There are millions of ideas to change the world, but unless you build it, it doesn't count. And this is kind of controversial in the States, and I truly believe this. If you don't build a building, you're not an architect. I don't care about licensing. I don't care about how many, whether you've got tenure, whether you're the dean of a school of architecture. If you haven't built a building, you're not an architect. It's pretty simple. That's what an architect does. And so for us, we have to make a commitment to implement those solutions. We also have to think about imagining the future. We can't just design for a response to a disaster or a post-conflict. We have to think about how do you design for 2042. So 2 projects we did last year that were quite radical. One was we made a catamaran, a 60-foot catamaran that sailed from San Francisco to Sydney to raise awareness about the plastic in the Pacific Ocean. And it was 100% made out of PET with the exception of the mast. So everything else is actually the kind of crappy plastic bottles. But we actually worked with a team to make something called SRPET, which is structural reinforced PET. Why that's important is you can now take waste and turn it into a seismically sound construction material. So you're turning something from waste to something that's positive. On the other end of the spectrum, we worked in the Swat Valley of Pakistan to do self-built housing, bamboo construction that was seismically sound and built for $800 a house. Why is that important? Because for $1,250, you can have a UN winterized tent, which only lasts a year. But by working with the community and using local materials, you can do that for half that amount. So we actually got a grant to build 3 refugee camps, and we accidentally built 3 permanent villages. And we went back to the funder and said, we kind of forgot to buy the tents, and we worked with the community and built houses. Is that okay? And we kind of had some money left over, so we built a few schools. So you do need to break the rules. And so that leads you into the second one, is the focus is on social and economic change, not just aesthetic. But that doesn't mean you can't ignore aesthetic. One of the things that happens in community-based design is the idea of beauty becomes really important. The conversations about beauty. It doesn't matter what society, what demographic you come from, beauty really matters. When something is beautiful, you love it, you own it, and you maintain it. So my family is from Scotland, which means that we're really, really cheap. So the reason that I love really beautiful buildings is that the community will maintain it and it's cheaper, right? So just a pure economics of using aesthetics within your work. Also, you've seen this in the last 2 presentations, is the inclusion of cultural and environmental sustainability. I've got to go through these quick. So the way we work is we embed architects in the community. They live and work in the community that they build the building from anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. We pay them on a monthly stipend. They work as professionals, and the reason they get paid is for a couple of reasons. That they don't treat this like a Friday night project they're doing because they have a huge heart and they feel bad. They're treating this like a Monday morning project that they give the same dignity and respect that they would give a commercial project. And secondly, if you don't adhere to the needs of the community, I will fire you. If you're a crap designer, I will fire you. I have no qualms in doing that. And so the idea is the professionalization of humanitarian work is really important. And the reason that we can we pay them as well is, do you know how hard it is to fire a volunteer? You actually have to tell someone who's working for you for free that their being on the project is detrimental to this community. It's really hard to break that to someone. So if you pay them, it's good. Also, to partner with local design and building professionals and not undermine them, create kind of a collaboration between the two. And then engaging the community as partners, learning, listening, and designing together. And eventually helping create opportunities by building jobs through local construction trade. And part of the process is not just to design, but implement it in a way that will maximize the number of local jobs. So that's creating a community resiliency. So this is the only geeky chart. So most of you would understand who that person is up there. They've got a turtleneck and round-rimmed glasses. So that's the architect. And so we're taking donations, which we call investments, into technical expertise and construction capital. Then I manage all the contracts, not just on the design phase, but also on the contracting phase, so that we hire local businesses. And in the contracts, we make them do skills training and job recovery. So it's basically a job stimulus package. It's kind of I actually just joined the Obama administration for this, so maybe they're going to do this in the States. And then probably the most important ideal in your job is to design yourself out of it. The worst thing is working in a community is that you have this dependency issue that you start doing one small project, and it's been so impactful and successful that you end up staying. And there's nothing worse than an occupying force. And I live in the States, so I know that really well. And architects and designers tend to end up doing that, is they become very engaged in the community and they don't leave. So part of your role is to figure out how to transfer leadership. Now, one truth. So this is the one truth. This is actually a meme that's going around in the US right now. It's a little, you'll see this on Facebook. Which is that design won't change the world, but it's actually a mechanism to create opportunity for change to happen. So, part of that is not about designing. It's very simple. Get it built. So, like everybody else, I just came out with a book, came out last week, sorry. And my book publisher's like, oh, you need to go on book tours and tell everybody to buy this book. I mean, isn't that why they're a book publisher? They should be selling the book. We should just do the projects. So fuck that, I'm not going to talk about it. So we're going to talk about projects. So very quickly, this is a project we did working in Dhaka, which is a guy who lived in 18 inches and 30 feet. I've got 12 minutes, so I'm going to go past this one. Replicating health clinics in India, where we came up with a design process. We built 8. We made sure that we did design iterations. Then we created a manual. I love the manuals. We've got a lot coming. As a way to replicate that, now 300 clinics in Hyderabad. In Gaza, this is an interesting project where when somebody tells you that architecture is not political, they're also not an architect. Every time you do something, it's a political act, either personal or professional. You're making a decision. If you say, I would love to build a giant tower in Dubai using slave labor, you're actually making a political decision, right? Or if you say, I want to make sure that every one of my projects uses natural ventilation, is sustainable, it's kind of a political decision, because political decisions are basically human decisions. So we were asked to help do a repair strategy for Gaza, and what we did is we came up with a manual. We worked with about 300 families, and we were not political. It wasn't a politicized manual. It just basically said, oh, if you've been shelled, turn to page 42, and this is how to repair your window. If you've been bulldozed, turn to page 68, and that's how to build your house. So it's a very kind of ironic but very serious manual of how to repair your house after you've been attacked by mortar shells. In America, we're having this big problem where there's no access to groceries. Detroit, Chicago, LA. If you live in a poor neighborhood, you have something that's called a party store. And a party store is essentially a liquor store with bread and chips, right? And that's where people buy food. And poor people don't have access to transit, so they end up having obesity issues. In 1973, when I was born, it had a 17% obesity rate in the US. Right now, it's 34%. So what's happening is these food deserts are creating more and more obese people. So this inner city group called Fresh Moves realized that with the downturn in the economy, buses were being slashed by the cities. So they got a couple of buses, the routes were already there, and then they worked with farmers to create an organic grocery store that's a for-profit that actually goes into these food deserts and sells fresh vegetables. It opened in March, and it's been sold out every day since, and they're now expanding it out of Chicago into LA and New York. And then I know there's some very well-known Dutch architects that got to work in China and build giant towers, but what you may not know is that the people that worked on those towers tend to be very poor migrant labor from China who don't get paid very well. And as a result, both members of the family, the mother and the father, have to work on the construction site for 14 hours a day, and their kids end up living in the housing units, which are essentially refugee camps without any education. So this small NGO from China came up with this idea of getting architects, our Chinese Chinese architects to create simple classrooms that could actually move with the migrant construction labor. So, when the big firm wins another project in Beijing, then the kids could actually keep being educated as they get shuffled to the next city. So I'm going to talk about two quick things. I was going to talk about open source. We have no time for it. So we're going to just talk about this, which is the idea of sports as a mechanism for social change. And luckily, my job's been done fairly well by the previous speakers, because you understand the idea of community-based design processes. I was designing and building mobile AIDS clinics in sub-Saharan Africa in 2004 and stumbled across this issue of young girls not being able to have access to healthcare because of the issues around gender. And so we started a soccer field that came out of the discussion with the girls about access to sports, and that the coaches of the girls' teams had to be HIV medical professionals. We did a design competition, and we had no money. So there are some older people in the audience I've seen. But for those of you who are under 30, this is before the thing called Facebook and Twitter, right? It's like this movement didn't exist, right? Which is like, I've had to explain to people what a blackboard is. And so it was really hard to raise 30,000 euros, really hard. I was people wouldn't invite me to parties because they knew I would ask them for money, right? My mom wouldn't invite me for Christmas because she knew I would ask for money. It was really depressing. So then I got a phone call from this this Danish group, and they said, "You've won this international design award called the Index Design Award because you built this amazing project in South Africa." And I was like, "What project?" I was like, "Oh, the renderings," right? And they thought we'd actually built the project. We actually hadn't. But the design prize was enough money to build the project. So we flew to Copenhagen, we picked up the money, and we built the project. So then something funny happened. A couple of weeks after building it, I get a phone call from the Swiss gentleman who says, "Apparently you guys are design experts for doing sports projects for social change." Now, as you can tell, I'm partially English. I was born in Peckham, and I was raised as an Englishman. And so any Englishman who gets called an expert would turn around and be like, "Oh, no, we're not experts. We've just done one little project, blah, blah, blah," right? But as you can tell by my accent, I've lived in the States. And so the American in me was like, "Damn right, we're experts." And so I was like, "Yeah, we're experts." And so this Swiss gentleman says, "Well, I represent something called FIFA, and we're going to do a World Cup in Africa, and we have no CSR strategy, and we would like to do sports projects for social change. Could you replicate this project throughout the African continent?" Sure. Now, at this point, I was the only member of staff, and this was my night job. 3 weeks later, I get a phone call. Actually, it was a conference call between a firm in Beaverton, Oregon, and one in Amsterdam. And they were a sportswear company. And they said, "Apparently, you guys are experts at doing projects for social change." It worked last time, so I said, "Yeah, we're experts." And of course, that was Nike. And they said, "Well, we want to do projects all over the globe. Could you do that?" So I'm going to just go through these very, very quickly. Preventing violence in South Africa using urban acupuncture. This was working with the kids to develop the program, integrating artists, having a social venture to create a for-profit mechanism for maintenance of the building, a light tower that lights up and allows the police and a hospital to know when something's happened so there could be rapid response, that led to a massive decrease in crime and a huge increase in perceived safety. And over 18,000 kids used that one center for HIV/AIDS training. We did violence prevention and anti-gang violence in Rio. Working with designers who ended up, as a way to communicate, we actually had some drug dealers on our design team. I have no time. You can ask me in the party about it. It's an awesome story. Our architect also happened to be a samba DJ, so you could actually call up and ask for a samba song or ask about the architecture. So this is the idea of architecture going outside of just the realm of drawings and community meetings. I love this because the client, actually the contractor, was getting a lot of grief because the neighborhood was like, "I think your contractor is bribing you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? Why do you think he's bribing me?" He goes, "Well, for starters, your building's not straight." So it's like the idea. So let's just say that Zaha is fucked in the Rios, in the favelas, because that would never fly. This is a really important picture. It was a favorite picture from last year. The saddest thing about Facebook is to realize how depressing architects are. And I say this because I am one. Anybody who's an architectural student or a young designer, if you look at their holiday photos, it's really, really depressing. What happens, it rains like the night before in Barcelona, and so you've got this nice reflective glow, and then they get up at 5 in the morning to take pictures without people in them, because that's the architecture. That's not architecture, that's just sculpture. Architecture is where life happens. Architecture should be where grandparents are hanging out, teenagers are hooking up, and there's a stray animal in your building. Like, it's only a successful project if there's a stray dog, chicken, donkey in one of our buildings. So we've done these centers in Kenya, Rwanda, doing Hutus and Tutsi collaborations, in Mali, in Lesotho. This is all in the last 2.5 years. In Namibia, in Ghana, that just opened last week. In Kenya, doing rainwater catchment. The same cost of doing a deep water well, we could collect enough rainwater and build a basketball court and actually a place to hold weddings and performances. The Skateistan project, where young kids actually, when kids skate on the streets of Kabul, neither the Taliban or the US military fight on those streets. So what they were doing is they were taking street by street, and the idea of skaters actually are much more peaceful and actually less, much more cost-effective than drones. In Guatemala, we took over streets that were underutilized by using GIS mapping and changing the government's ruling so it was no longer a street, it was a public space. Then at midnight, we put in soccer facilities, and at 6 a.m., the kids came over and programmed it, and it turned into sports facilities. In Mexico, we did appropriate technology projects and teaching people how to do bamboo and rammed earth construction. And then in the States, we've been dealing with the obesity issue and taking over blighted spaces. And this is a skate park that's underneath the Manhattan Bridge, and you can see the kind of structural supports there. So this project that I started 8 years ago has now helped about 750,000 children, and we've got probably about another 500,000 kids lined up for projects that are going to happen throughout Latin America. I have 2 minutes, and I'm going to quickly talk about Haiti, and if I get a chance, Japan. So most of the work we're doing right now, about 40% of our work is in Haiti. We're the largest architectural and construction company in the country, and the only reason that is we didn't cut and run. It wasn't a 2-week project. We said, when we get involved in a disaster, you have 4 days to commit that you're going to do the project. You have 4 months to get an office mobilized and get funds raised, and you have to commit to a minimum of 4 years in the reconstruction project. You cannot rebuild a community unless you commit that to the community. The last thing they want is someone to come in, give them a fancy design, say, now go raise the money. Your role is to figure out how to implement that solution. And also in a situation where 220,000 buildings collapsed and not a single person was prosecuted for it. So we had to upgrade the construction technology. We have a one-stop shop. This is Maison d'Architecture, 40 architects and engineers. If you want to go live there for as long as you like, you certainly can. We're hiring. Doing construction training, reviews, quality control, calling out other NGOs that are using your EU money for fucked up projects. Essentially, NGOs get a lot of money to build these temporary houses, and they spend anywhere between 250 to 12,000 euros on a plastic tent with some metal frame on it. And most of the money is coming from the US taxpayer and the EU. So thank you very much for paying for these crappy buildings. So our responsibility is to actually blow the whistle on them and just say, look, there's no way we should be spending this, because I could build a permanent house with Haitian professionals. Exactly. That kid knows what I'm talking about. By creating hundreds of jobs doing permanent housing. So then we do that. So I got to flick very fast. I have no time for the video. 50% of our work is schools. The reason they're schools is 50% of my funding is from children. Very little is from architects. Most of my funding is happening from kids between 14 and 18 years old. They raise all the money online. We have a very kind of open dialogue with them about what we want to rebuild. And of course, they said we'd like to build schools for kids our age. So we're involved in a lot of reconstruction. We also have some pretty well-known people part of our projects. This is Shakira. The reason I just note this is we have one rule in the organization. It's called the no asshole policy, which is we don't work with assholes, we don't take money from assholes, and they don't work in the company. And what that's led to is really nice people that end up doing really nice projects. It's kind of like dating. Have you ever been on a date where by the middle of dinner you just want to leave? Like you're desperately hoping something happened to your family so you can leave. You're like, oh, please, someone text me that there's been a car accident or something and get out of this awful date, right? You'll never go on a date with this person again. In the NGO world, because it's so tied to funding, you go on a terrible date with a funder and you say, but it's for the kids. And you know what? Bad dates just end up into awful relationships. And too many people are starting bad relationships for the wrong reasons. And so we have a rule that if you're well known, A, you don't get your name on the building, and B, you better pay for it because you're rich. So we've worked with a lot of people. We're building schools. The other way you can get fired is if you see something that negatively affects the livelihoods of people. If there's something that happens that the well-being of another human being is at risk, and you wait for me, your boss, no one calls me the boss, to agree to spend money to help these people, I will fire you, right? If you don't respond immediately and just start using the funds we have at hand and help, then you're not doing your job. And here's a good case in point. Raise of hands, I'm only gonna do the men in this raising of hands, and there's a reason for this. How many guys here have actually watched childbirth? Like, in person? From the angle you should never watch it. Now, let's be honest, and some of you may have the people who gave birth next to you. It is the most horrific, horrible thing you'll ever watch in your life. Right, you tell them that it's loving and it's caring, but it is like there's wires and this thing pops out like it's from Alien. It's like, and you're freaking out and you're like, so, and this is in a Western hospital with lots of doctors. Now, imagine Port-au-Prince a month after the earthquake. Now, unfortunately, time doesn't wait for a disaster, and you can't tell people to cross their legs because it's just been, an earthquake. So what was happening in the refugee camps is there was a pop tent. It was about the size of the stage. And in it, I happened to be in the camp at the time, and this Dr. Nicole said, could you just come in and lend a hand? I was like, okay, whatever that means. I walk in there's 8 deck chairs and 8 women giving birth. And she's the only medical professional. Now, I'd like to think of myself as a gentleman. I'd like to know your name before I go to that area of you, right? And just like, I was like, could everyone introduce themselves before I help deliver your baby? You know, I was just like, so it was like the most horrific 45 minutes of my life, because I'm like freaking out, like, what do you do? And of course, 3 weeks later, the hurricane season happened. And what do you do? I told my team to go and check out the clinic, and this is the only photo you really want to see. Because when the rains came, the births were still going on. So they had a week, and in 7 days, they built a women's clinic. It was a safe, sound, strong clinic, and the women were in there, and they were giving birth. A few weeks later after that, in the middle of the night, a tropical storm hit the camp, 600 tents destroyed. This is the camp owned by Sean Penn, who's crazy. If you've seen Apocalypse Now, it's exactly like that. And they're all in this tent, and the tent got destroyed. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, someone shouted out, an architect designed the clinic, we should all run in there for safety. I think in the history of architecture, no one has ever shouted out, an architect designed this building, let's run there for safety. So you can realize the impact of being kind of emergency architect. So I know we're going to talk about toilets, town planning. Okay, I've got no time for Japan. We built lots of stuff in Japan. It's like, look at this guy. He's got this look like, yeah, I know, but you do a lot of good stuff. So, one last story about Japan. So the thing about Japan I just want to notice is we've built about a dozen projects in Japan. You have to treat each disaster differently, and you have to look for the cracks and the areas that are not being responded to. In Japan, they had funds for schools. They had money for rebuilding the infrastructure. They had a government in place, unlike Haiti. But what they don't have and what they've been ignoring is small businesses. They're all being decimated across the north. And the thing is, most people thought that the tsunami had hit a bunch of kind of anime designers, like hipster, Tokyo, cool. Like that's the perception of what a Japanese person is. I can describe to you the north of Japan, Tohoku. The people there are blue-collar, salt-of-the-earth fishermen, right? There's signs all over the north that just says, fuck you, tsunami, we're rebuilding. And to give you some context, I was an architect during 9/11 in New York, and I had clients in the building in WTC1, and I was downtown, watched the whole thing, helped my clients get back in, and I kind of watched the whole grieving period happen in New York. On the 6-month anniversary of the tsunami, their memorial was to blare the tsunami horn for 2 minutes, and everybody just stood at the water and watched it, to be like, go ahead. Like, you can't get us. It was like chills. I was just like, man, you guys are hardcore. And so Sato-san, this is the story of Sato-san. Sato-san is the worst fisherman in Japan. For the last 20 years, everyone in his village, Shinzogawa, has said, Sato-san, you are a terrible fisherman. You can catch fish, but you don't know how to tie knots. Fishermen do 2 things. They fish and they tie knots. Because when you come back to port, you've got to tie your boat up. And Sato-san was the worst knot tire in Japan. Every couple of days, his boat would like float out in the middle of the bay because he couldn't tie a and they were like, Sato-san, for God's sake, tie the goddamn knots, right? So, March 11th, the tsunami came. 53 meters high, 200 miles an hour. Sato-san is terrible at tying knots. Every fisherman in Shinzogawa had their boat destroyed. Sato-san's boat, released, was raised up, moved 4 kilometers inland, and dropped perfectly without any damage. This is Sato-san's boat. It's the only boat in Shinzogawa that's existing. Sato-san is currently the head of the Fishermen's Union. Sato-san, the first thing he did, he said, let's start a company. I'm going to invite all my friends, and you guys can all work for me. The first thing I need is anyone who could tie knots. Does anyone in this town know how to tie knots? So now he's become the leader of this town. We're kind of developing this design, and it'll be built in the next 2 months. We're doing all these other projects. That's the end of that. We've also given $1 million to architects over the last year, just accidentally. There was all these amazing, you guys got to apply for funding, seriously. We've just got a lot of projects we don't have a presence on the ground, and people come to us and say, I want to fund in this part of Mexico, and we can help channel the funding through. And it turns out that we gave about $1 million away. So what do you do that's next? On February the 14th this year, I wrote a love letter to architects, because I don't know if you've ever been to a party that's been hosted by architects. It's really depressing. Right? You go to one with a graphic designer or industrial designer, those are rocking parties. But architects tend to be really self-loathing. You know, everybody else, they love architecture. Architects are like, oh, my job sucks, the clients are awful, I never get paid. It's really depressing to be around them. And so I wrote this letter that just says, actually, what you do for a living is pretty fucking amazing, and you should love the fact that you're an architect. What happened out of that is thousands of people read the letter, hundreds of people replied to me, and then came this whole thing about I love architecture. And all these people make graphics and things like that, and then dozens of like well-known architects donated hand sketches, like I love architecture hand sketches, to us, and we're going to auction them off, and we're going to do a massive party in New York next week. You're all invited. And so we're probably going to raise probably another $200,000 and give it all away to young designers. And I'm going to end, God, you hate me right now. I'm going to end just by explaining one little thing. There are 7 billion people on the planet. Less than 3.5% of the world utilizes the services of an architect. Of those architects, less than 0.0001% of them actually get published or are known. You ask any first-year architecture student to name 6 architects, they get to Frank, Rem, Zaha, then they get stuck. The reality is that we as a profession are irrelevant. And what's happening is as we have become getting less and less jobs, we all kind of design the same. Let's just face it, we've all been educated the same, we all read the same books, we all pay for the same lessons. So we're essentially the same kind of designer, but some of us like lime, and some of us like blue, and some of us like things that do that, and some of them, it's very similar. And so, say I'm an architect in Amsterdam, there's a new museum being opened, you're an architect too. I kind of know his firm, I know the style he's gonna have, so I know how to compete, I know he's in the running. So how am I gonna win the job? Is it going to be with talent? No. It's going to be, I'm going to underbid him by 5%. I'm going to pay my staff shit. I'm going to have a bunch of interns I got from Delft to work for free for me. And then I'm going to get the project. And then as a result, I don't have the funding to be sustainable, and we're the worst paid profession in the world doing work for the richest people in the world. So that's architecture. This is me. I have 1 billion people. They're my clients. You can't have them, okay? Not you, no. That's my billion. Can we just all agree? So we'll share, we'll divvy up. So the reason I mention that is there's 4 billion people on the planet who are known as emerging middle class. And when they have money, they spend it on 3 things: education for their kids, healthcare for their family, or their living condition, which means every day there's a multi-billion-dollar business in improving housing, education, and healthcare, and none of you are in it. This is where you can make a shit ton of money. You don't have to care about people, and you can make a ton of money if you charge them 1 rupee each. And the reason I mention that is you can work in the north, lots of places there where there's unemployed architects, like New York, Lisbon, Barcelona, Rome. Or you can look to the south. And the difference is you can either spend 30 years in despair trying to get some sort of attention, or you can have 3 billion clients who respect you. So I think what's happening is we're at this dividing line between architecture and how can we transform and change it. So my only advice is don't sacrifice your soul. This is my staff in Haiti. And focus on what really matters to you. If you want to do glistening towers in Bahrain, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do it. But if you want to actually help communities in Amsterdam that are immigrants that are coming in and there's a friction between the communities, you want to try and create social cohesion, do that. So the only way you can do that is by breaking the rules, by running over 15 minutes over your allotted time schedule. But given the fact that I flew 52 hours to get here, I don't care. Get it built. And this one's for this town, but I'm hiring. I have 12 positions, and I pay about 20% less than the average medium, but actually at the moment, the salaries have been dropping at such a rate, I actually pay more than most architects right now. So if you want a job in any of these countries, just let me know. So you can either join us. So Benetton did this, right? It was supposed to be like the superheroes of design. They made me fatter. What is up with that? How comes all my architects got to look like my Colombian architect, Daniel? He looks like super awesome. Sandhya from India looks like a total Bollywood rock star. I look like I've eaten one of my staff members. But I'm serious. You can either join me, you can fund me, you can work for me, or take me out. Because the only way I'm retiring is you come up with a better solution to provide architectural and design services for everybody. So this is the Ides of March retirement plan. If you're better than me, take me out. But above all, design like you give a damn. Thank you.
Please, round of applause. Just Robin Hood and Fidel Castro of architecture goes over the speech by an hour. Takes from the rich, gives to the poor.
So I recently spoke in Caracas in Venezuela, and they allotted my time schedule as 4.5 hours. And I was like, are you kidding me? I could show every family photo in that time. What am I going to talk about? And the host goes, that's half a Shabbos. Why are you complaining? So
fantastic. Thank you very much. There is something interesting about what you said about the Japanese fishermen, mm-hmm. And it just strikes me that maybe you yourself are a Japanese fisherman in a sense that you didn't know how to tie the knot to the client, mm-hmm. and decided just to, by chance, find a different set of clients, and the client is really the community, mm-hmm. and in a sense that has brought you in a place where now that there is a form of transformation in architecture, that transformation is something that has not caught with you or everybody who works with you. Because in a way, you guys were detached from that system.
Right. I think what happened is as the architectural community became fragmented, I mean, I was taught at the Bartlett, which was like, you know, you design blobs and some like ribbony things, and, you know, that's called architecture. And I felt like the black sheep of the family. And what's happened is with the downturn in the economy and this realization that, you know, it's a very simple thing. I think architects realized that they don't need to design attractive buildings, but they need to design beautiful buildings. And there's a very big difference. The difference between attractive and beautiful is you'll sleep with something that's attractive, but you'll fall in love with something that's beautiful. And architects have decided that they want to start doing beautiful buildings, and it's not really the cost of the building, and it's not really the location of the building, but it's the soul of the building. And that's what we want to do, is we want to discover the soul of a building.
Bringing back soul to architecture. But I'm sure that the audience has more questions, and I think maybe we should open up just a couple. And you will be very short because you are very good at having very brief answers.
Yes.
So we'll be fine.
Yeah, who wants to...
You know, for the guys in the cheap seats, because I know you're the ones who are applying for jobs right now, it's jobs@architectureforhumanity.org. But I'll be at the party, and you could ask me that, because you know.
I thought they were up there because they were going to jump since they...
Yeah, because they're just about to graduate, and they're wondering where they can get a job. Yeah. Okay. You know, there's more, I was just telling him, there's more Lisbon-educated Portuguese architects working in Rio than working in Lisbon right now. That most of the schools, as soon as they graduate, they're going to Latin America because there's more work there than there is in Portugal. So that's just a fact, too.
Who?
Lucas?
Yes.
Do you want to?
Just raise hand, shout, I'll repeat, or I come to you.
I don't bite. I've only had one coffee today.
Well, maybe what people want is really to have some drinks.
Yes.
And then get you at the bar.
After this, they're going to be like, make it strong and don't give me any ice.
And let's go for that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you. There is some drinks downstairs.
They're already poured in. Yeah.
Already poured in, ready.
They're already.
And we should keep the conversation going and move to downstairs. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for this fantastic first day.
Thank you.